Hey, Facebook, welcome. I am Dr. Toby Watson, and I am not only streaming live right now on my Facebook page, which is the Dr. Toby Out On Call, but also through the International Society of Ethical Psychology and Psychiatry, also known as ISEPP. And I think this might even be our first live stream that we've done. So I am the former executive director of ISEPP. And I was talking with Chuck Ruby, the chairman of the board and former, I think, executive director, and Al Galves. Dr. Al Galves is the former executive director after I had done it. And we wanted to talk a little bit to everybody and just kind of share our thoughts about with this COVID-19, the stay-at-home order or quarantine that a lot of countries, as well as the United States, has been under, and how this is about affecting mental health and how all these things kind of integrate between the politics of it, the mental health itself, the diagnosing, and what's happening, with our humanity right now as we go through this. So Dr. Galves is I think, kind of world renowned. At least in my world, he's world renowned. He's written a book, Lighten Up. I think it was at Light. Oh God, I'm blanking on the name of it.
Lighten up, dance with your dark side.
Dance with your dark side. That's
Lighten
it.
Up, dance with your dark side. Yeah.
So let's bring in Dr. Al Galves to the show right now, and here we go. And as long as we have Dr. Galves here, I thought, why not make it more fun and entertaining? We can bring in another expert. Her name is Grace Jackson. Dr. Grace Jackson is a practicing psychiatrist. She's also was a board member of ISEPP. Haven't talked to her for a while. Usually we get to see each other only once a year at one of the conferences. But I reached out to her and said, hey, you want to come in? Let's just have a chat for 10 minutes. Let's talk about mental health. Let's talk about your family. Let's see, kind of how you're doing. So with that, I'm going to see if Grace can pop in as well.
Hey, there we go.
Hey, we're all here.
Good deal.
Hi, Grace.
Hi, Al. Great to see you. Hi, Toby.
Hi, nice to see you both. So you heard me do a little bit of the intro on the monologue. What are your thoughts right now? I know you're both practicing right now. I think you're both down in Arizona. Is that true? Dr. Galves?
I'm in New Mexico.
Okay,
Southern
so you're in
New
New Mexico. And how about for you, Grace? How are you?
I'm in Arizona. Yeah, I'm in Sedona.
So you're in Sedona, Arizona. And Dr. Galves, tell me a little bit about, I guess, what you're doing right now. If you're seeing patients, are you noticing a change right now in the last couple of months since the stay-at-home order has been in effect?
I'm seeing patients. Yes, I do it over the phone, Skype, Zoom. It hasn't really changed that much for me. But you know what I'm noticing, Toby? This is really interesting. When mental health professionals like psychiatrists, psychologists are interviewed about the COVID-19 and what's going on with mental health,
yeah.
And when they're asked what can people do, none of them say take a drug. It's really interesting. None of them says, hey, I think you should take a drug. They all say things like, well, you're going to be anxious because this is scary, and maybe you can use your anxiety to protect yourself. I mean, the anxiety can be very useful. The anxiety gives you energy and sharpness, and you can use it to protect yourself. They talk about maintaining contact with other people, talking to friends. They talk about getting information so you don't get too scared, because if you have good information, you won't get too scared. So this is interesting. They're not talking about drugs. It's clear that they understand that the reason people are anxious is because of what's happening in their lives, and this has to do with concerns about their lives. So yeah, sure, there's chemical imbalance, there's biochemistry going on, there's genetics going on, there's brain function going on, but that's not important.
Okay, so let me ask Dr. Jackson then. Dr. Jackson, you're a psychiatrist. What do you think about what Dr. Galves is saying? That we are seeing people becoming more anxious. They're losing something, and we've all changed. Whether it's our routine, whether it's our money, there are people who are dying, who are getting sick. We've all lost something. So he's indicated that, hey, a lot of people aren't asking, or maybe not asking for meds, but a lot of people aren't being directed to medications because we understand there's a reason why. A normal reaction to this very abnormal situation. Is that indicative of what they call mental illness, or is that just like mental illness, but it's just for whatever reason, people are not, I guess, pushing medications. What are your thoughts?
Well, I am not in a private practice setting at the moment, so I do hospital consultation work, or have been doing primarily hospital-based, what's called consult liaison psychiatry, for the past 3 years. And I'm waiting to do some outpatient work, so I'll have a little bit more insight into that probably next month. But the hospital situation has changed. From my perspective, I've been working with a rural hospital, and what the public's not realizing is the threats of COVID in terms of the budgets of small hospitals. So contractors are being laid off, and a lot of the small hospitals are running significant budget deficits. It's not clear how many small hospitals may actually go out of business or be taken over. So from what I have seen, volumes of patients flowing through emergency rooms with declared mental health crises were actually staying away.
Okay.
So it was actually a downturn in terms of the volume of what typically would have been people going to emergency rooms for various assessments. So, in that sense, it's been sort of interesting on the hospital side. Some of that's changing now, but what I see more than anything is a split in terms of what the mainstream media presents in the United States and what the realities are. So fortunately, through the internet, we have access to more information than probably ever in history, which is both a good and bad thing. There's so much information you can spend your whole day searching for where's the truth and where are the facts we need.
Yeah, yeah, I've gotten a little
But
bit of a conspiracy theory going on in my head right now, and I'm trying to like
oh,
really tone that
yeah,
back.
sure. I don't think it's necessary to invoke conspiracies. Who really cares at this point where things originated and all of that? But in
Yeah,
terms of the federal government's failure to protect the public health of the United States, and the fact that individuals are totally left entirely on their own to
yeah,
figure out, how do I take care of myself? How do I take care of my family? There is no help coming from the federal government. There's no help coming from the state governments. There's no help anywhere on the horizon. And so it is a very dark moment in the history of the United States. So
yeah,
without
yeah,
getting too political and economic, ultimately mental health is a reflection of politics and economics. And so
yeah,
we can't talk about people's mental well-being without talking about the society of which they're a part. And we can't talk about mental illness in an individual, because we're not individuals. We're members of society. We're social beings. And
okay,
so like John Donne said, for whom does the bell toll? No man's an island. And when 80,000 plus people have died in the United States, I think people who think and reflect on this are enormously hurt by that alone, but more to the point of thinking of folks who are, burning through their savings, losing their health insurance,
sure.
and are unemployed, and there's no help coming. So
Yeah, no, I
this is an
recognize.
interesting.
Yeah, and I've seen the reports by other international groups and agencies talking about the secondary impact of COVID-19, where we're going to see increases in poverty because of people losing their jobs. People are going to fall into that category, millions of people, and then the death toll from that secondary process. Not to mention the secondary intervention, not maybe being instructed to go to the hospitals for some of these surgeries that have been delayed. I have a lot of nurses and friends that are in the healthcare industry who've also indicated that they're furloughed right now. A lot of people aren't getting the kind of treatment that they should be getting, and that's leading to secondary complications. It looks like we've made a turn where the country is starting to open up, better or worse. I think there's a debate out there whether we should or we shouldn't, and I think that there's valid points on both sides of that debate. My
Mhm.
question, I guess, to maybe Dr. Galves is that it seems that we haven't seen a lot of people coming on television talking about that, hey, go see your doctor, medication. Now we know that anti-anxiety medications over the last month or two have gone up. I think they said something like 300%. And we know that we've seen an increase in suicide calls, as well as to the help crisis line. I know there was one statistic that came out at the end of March, which said it was a 22% increase in monthly calls for people under the age of 18 who are being kind of locked in home. They don't have that escape to go to school, and they're in domestic violence situations with family, according to the RAIN group. which is the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network that runs one of the hotlines for sexual assault hotline. They're seeing that half the incoming calls are from minors. So we understand that there's a reason why people are struggling, and we're not recommending medications. We're not recommending that they get diagnosed and whatnot. So the question becomes is if that is quote unquote not mental illness, or let's say that we have a certain amount of time, like for example, for in the book that we quote unquote use, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the DSM, which again has been invalidated as not reliable and credible by one of our largest governing bodies, which is the National Institute of Mental Health. They don't use it anymore. But regardless, given this book, what we're finding is that there's a lot of people who are saying, hey, don't get diagnosed, because again, if you suffer a loss, like a trauma of somebody dying, you have a 2-week window only, what they say, before it becomes a mental illness and you can be diagnosed. There's a grieving process, the 2-week window they allow. It used to be 2 months, now it's like 2 weeks. Well, if there's a grieving process for that, and then they say, nope, after 15 days, then you can get diagnosed. What about this grieving process with COVID? You lost maybe your job, you've lost family, friends, you lost freedoms, you've lost a lot, going through this. What's the normal grieving time? Again, subjective, but is that the reason why they're saying, hey, this is normal and expected, so therefore we're not going to diagnose? Of course, I'd question then, like, well, okay, if somebody loses their job for any reason, not during COVID-19, and they get sad and depressed, isn't that a reason then to wait and say, no, that's a normal reaction, and we shouldn't maybe utilize psychotropic medications to suppress those thoughts and feelings, those behaviors, because it's kind of our internal radar. Dr. Galves, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I absolutely. I think the basic point, and what I was trying to make, and it really adds on to yours, is in this time, mental health professionals are telling people, hey, whatever's going on with you, whatever your symptoms are, if you want to use the word symptoms, it has to do with your life situation. It doesn't have to do with chemical imbalances and brain disorders and brain function and genetics. No, it has to do with your life and what's happening in your life. So why don't we do this with all quote unquote mental illness when we're not in COVID-19, and realize that what's going on with people has to do with their lives. Sure. And concerns they have about their lives.
Yeah, and I think that's where some of the research might be going, is talking about that with epigenetics, which means, and for people that don't understand that, a lot of times our life situations can affect our biology. We are biological beings. We have neurons firing. And if a dog runs into my studio, if a dog runs into my studio right now and bites me in the leg, guess what? A lot of things go off in my head. And the next time I see that dog, my neurons that wired together, or I should say fired together, got wired together. And so the next time I see that dog, I'm going to be scared and anxious. And that's biological, it's chemical. And there's lots of ways to counteract that. Whether I decided I'm going to suppress it with alcohol or cocaine or marijuana or a psychiatric drug, or whether I decide I'm going to do some more systematic kind of desensitization, successive approximation.
Well, that's my point. My point is that the chemistry is there, the brain function is there, genetics is there, but they're not important. They are not important to human beings. What's important is your life and how you're living your life. So it's really not a good idea to take drugs because you're anxious. The reason it's not a good idea is your anxiety is very helpful to you. Your anxiety is giving you energy and sharpness to enable you to deal with the situation you have to deal with, the threat or the demand or the problem or whatever it is.
Well, Dr. Jackson, how about that? Does one's anxiety, is it functional, and or should it be, kind of suppressed?
Well, I guess there are going to be a lot of different interpretations of this.
Choices. That's it right there. You get two choices.
No, I have to say all the above. No, I think there are certainly examples, of anxiety. I totally agree with what Al said, that anxiety is there for a reason. So we have two ways of looking at whatever a human being experiences in terms of their emotions, thoughts, and behaviors. And we can say that their emotions, thoughts, and behaviors are just popping in at any moment randomly, and we just don't know where they come from. Or we can say that emotions, thoughts, and behaviors are there for a very good reason, that they're always tied to something. So I think that that desire, or that curiosity to understand the context of things that might be deemed wrong or incorrect. Anxiety somehow is incorrect and it's a wrong emotion. Too much sadness is a wrong emotion. Too much happiness is a wrong emotion. You have to be just right. So
Yeah.
if you're too extreme in any of these situations, the societal response over the past 30, 40 years, I'll say 30 years, has
Okay.
been to medicate those wrong emotions or wrong behaviors and perceptions, to simply get them to what society will deem acceptable instead of looking at where they're coming from. So I totally agree with Al that we can dissect, molecular structures and electrons and protons if needed, and say, oh, we found the electron that's out of balance, and say we can rebalance the electron. And like Al is saying, who cares? Ultimately, what we really want to work with is what level can we intervene on that makes the most important significance to helping a person, live a higher quality life or a better life in
Sure.
terms of how they would define that. So I agree with Al, that looking at the life situation and looking at context. I will say, however, that we don't know enough about this particular virus yet in terms of the pathology of it. And part of what's been propelling rightful anxiety in people who think this through is the fact that there's so little knowledge, even at this point, 6 months into this. So we really don't know, and this is the irony where you're probably going to shoot me for saying it, but there is some research going on looking at some of the older psychiatric medicines to see if they have antiviral properties. So for example, you and I and Al have a long dedication to informed consent. And
Correct.
the fact that if people are going to use a substance of any sort, they have to have the right knowledge in order to use that safely or use that wisely. And it's no different with prescription medicines. So the interesting story, about the antipsychotic medicines, which are the drugs most often used for people who either hallucinate or have, strange thoughts or behaviors that are puzzling and bothersome to other people,
Unless
is
you
that,
happen to be in the Veterans Administration, in which case PTSD they tend to use a lot. But
oh, heck, there's use for everything now. Absolutely. Sleep, you name it. They're used for
yeah,
everything. So they
yeah,
fix everything. It's like kind of like Gorilla Glue or Gorilla Tape. But
I
anyway,
love it.
so it's true. So the antipsychotics, though, if you are in sub-Saharan Africa and you cannot afford a very expensive anti-malarial drug, or
Yeah,
tuberculosis therapies have failed, the older antipsychotic medicines have anti-malarial properties and anti-TB properties.
yeah,
So I am, very, very cautious about prescribing to people. The prescription of drugs that I do in hospital settings is
yeah,
really adjusting and reducing medicines that people have already been taking
yeah,
because of their numerous physical problems. However, one caveat there is we don't fully understand yet the appropriate biological uses of drugs that were previously related or reserved, strictly for psychiatric
mhm,
uses. And the psychiatric uses, again, we're not going to get into in this conversation,
yeah,
the philosophy of mind, brain, and monism and dualism and all these different concepts. But the
yeah,
issue of medicating, what would be situationally normative human species reactions to
right.
life situations is what we're talking about. And is there a better
I
way
agree.
to help people than simply medicating those issues? Because, honestly, I think we all agree there's no difference between going to a doctor and getting a prescription for a drug that changes your emotions and thoughts some way, and a person going out on the street and getting cocaine or choosing to use any other mind altering substance. A mind altering substance is a
Yeah,
mind altering substance. And the questions
yeah.
are, how do we alter our minds in ways that are most useful, and
Yeah,
how do we do it?
I took a little heat. I don't know if you remember
Exactly.
seeing a movie that I did a while back, a documentary where I had made that comment, highlighting that you can go see a street drug dealer and you can get a free sample and take that free sample and you might feel better. It'll change your neurons and it'll change your chemicals. And but at least a street drug dealer is not going to lie to you and say you need his drugs. They're not going to lie to you and say you have a chemical imbalance, it's genetic, you have a broken brain. Street drug dealer is going to at least say, hey, look, this might mess you up. It might make you feel better, but it's going to be addictive eventually. You're going to end up getting used to it and stuff. And for that reason, some psychiatrists, because obviously there's a lot of very well-intentioned and ethical psychiatrists like yourself out there, but in that case, some psychiatrists are going to be unethical by comparison to the street drug dealer, because that predator is one that you don't hear about when you're a child. talking about stay away from street drug dealers. We don't
I'd
tell
say it's
kids
worse.
to
Right.
worry about it.
Well, I would say it's worse to actually go to someone who is being surreptitious or engaging in a form of moral subterfuge because they're not honest with themselves about what they're doing. At least, like you're saying, I think it's a worse injury. It would be equivalent to a priest and pedophilia. You know, these are people you place your trust in, and so to be betrayed by a double standard, I have strong feelings.
By them not giving informed consent or
Oh,
Right.
that's a problem. People
and
are
again,
not
I'm not against
informed.
medications. I know Dr.
Right.
Galves. I mean, I know we're not anti-med. It's anti-misleading people about how they affect the brain, how they have the outcomes over the long term. Because what we're talking about really is that with like COVID-19 and with all the things that are going on, we see, you know, with like these types of issues, the suicide rate, you know, I read during recession, it doubles during a recession. Well, we're going to come into a severe recession, and we're in the severe, not really yet, but the unemployment rate has skyrocketed, and we're going to see it happen afterwards, depending on what happens over the next several weeks. But we recognize that if people do like mindfulness skills, you know, and I would say Google, in fact, Jewel of all people, remember the singer Jewel, she's got a wonderful website. In fact, I want to highlight it here for just a moment because I went to it and I said, you know, this is wonderful what she's doing. Let's see if I have it. Sorry, but if you Google Jewel and look up mindfulness skills, you're going to see it's www.jewelneverbroken.com. She's got mindfulness skills on there, and it's just a 3-minute little like exercise that you can do, and you can learn a lot of these mindfulness skills, which keep your positivity, keep your optimism. It stops you from dipping into those more depressive, you know, nihilistic kind of thinking patterns. And that's what we're talking about, is the difference between taking something organic and natural, which is the ability to change your mind with your mind. And as far as we know, we're the only species on the planet that has that idea of consciousness, where we can change our brain by just thinking about it and doing things like that, versus artificially taking something and forcing it to change. You know, it's a matter of like, hey, if you got a computer, are we going to adjust the actual hard drive? Are we going to adjust that piece of equipment, or are we going to adjust the programming? And I think that we're recognizing, yeah, it's a little more complicated because there's a mind-body interaction. But I recognize that it does seem to me long-term outcomes always seem the better, the more natural you go.
Absolutely. Now, as you know, Toby, there's an association between psychiatric drugs and suicide and violence. And there's a reason for that. The reason for that is that all psychiatric drugs take away emotions. They take away people's caring and conscience. So they numb emotions. Well, one of the reasons, I mean, the main reason people don't kill themselves is because they know it would be horrible for their families and their friends. They know it would be.
We should probably put the caveat.
Now, when you take that away, this is a no-brainer. This is easy. You can connect the dots. You take away that caring, it makes it easier for people to kill themselves.
And I want to put it out just briefly, just again, for people that listen, this is going to be, we're streaming right now, you know, live worldwide, actually. And I know we have a lot of people down in Brazil and other countries that watch. That might be true. And it is that, you know, psychiatric medication, especially the SSRIs, can increase suicidal risk and behaviors, as well as violence and even homicidal behaviors. However, it's not an endorsement that you should stop taking your medications if you're taking medications, because one of the most dangerous times when you do take a medication is when you start the medication and when you stop a medication. So if you're going to do that, ideally work with a medical provider, try to work with some professional when you're doing that to monitor, because it can be very dangerous. So I want to make sure we get that in that little plug.
No, I appreciate that. I mean, you got to be careful with, you know, withdrawing from psychiatric drugs. But, you know, you made the point about informed consent. People don't get good information. People aren't told that, look, these drugs are going to numb your emotions. You don't want to numb your emotions. That's not a very smart thing to do. Your emotions are very important, especially the so-called negative ones. They have very important information for you. Sadness tells you what's important to you, what you want to nurture and protect in your life. Jealousy tells you what you want and don't have. It's really good to know what you want. Anxiety gives you the energy and the sharpness you need to deal with problems, with demand. Guilt is really important. Guilt keeps you from doing things that you think are wrong. All of these emotions have really important messages for you that help you live your life. Anger is a wonderful emotion. Anger tells you what you don't like, what you want to get rid of, what's in your way, what's threatening you, what's hurting you, and it gives you the energy you need to deal with it. So all of these emotions are absolutely important for you to live your life in a satisfying and good way. To numb them is really not a smart thing to do.
So I got a few questions. I'm just watching people as they comment, and we have a gentleman from Chile who has indicated that he said, yeah, he doesn't believe it's a good strategy to medicate normal reactions like anxiety. But he said, when is it okay then to maybe use medications? Do you have a thought about when would it be okay to use a medication? Dr. Jackson.
Well, I think it's a great question. I mean, we live, I imagine every society is this way in the industrialized North and industrialized countries, even, in the Southern Hemisphere. The United States is unique in terms of its ignoring the world, which is a sad situation. But since this comment's from Chile, I am assuming that medication is not over the counter. There is a libertarian argument that I know many people, even some in ISEPP in the past, have postulated or posited and said, why aren't the medicines just over the counter and let people have free access? So back to your question, when is it proper or when is it appropriate? If people did not have to depend on a licensed authority for accessing these prescription medicines, then we would see people using things perhaps experimentally or in a different way to get their own answers. So let's take the example of alcohol. When does alcohol become too much? Alcohol's obviously like many other substances. It's normal for human beings to experiment with substances, chemical substances, for various reasons. But when we talk about when is anxiety too much, we give the example of performing artists. Is probably one of the best examples when musicians go into a recording studio and cannot afford to make a single error because they're laying down a track. It's not unusual for physicians to prescribe an anti-high blood pressure medicine called a beta blocker, and that is to actually calm the nerves, steady the nerves and make a person less prone to jitters or shakes and let the voice not be quavering. And so there is, quite a history of using those medicines because in the context of needing perfection in recording, people will try using those medications. So again, this is context dependent, back to what Al's saying, what is the life situation? And individuals make that determination. I'm thinking of this current circumstance, right? And when we're talking about the fact that the ordinary tools that holistic practitioners would be helping folks with or helping to develop a menu of alternatives to prescription drugs or other chemicals, those ordinary tools have been cut off for the world. And I don't know how many of the viewers in the United States, perhaps in other countries, people are aware of the world situation, but people in the United States, I know in my community, don't seem to be aware of the fact that the world's closed right now. You cannot fly anywhere except Nicaragua, and you cannot go border to border anywhere. So this is something that has never happened in history. And the countries that are coming out of lockdown are doing this very gradually. But for a period of 2 months, certainly Italy, Spain, Germany, they've had very, very severe lockdowns, maybe not as severe as Wuhan, but for people to not be allowed to go out is extraordinary. So when you speak about people in closed spaces and people being subjected to 24/7 access to other folks that they would normally not be around 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, the outlets for social activity, the outlets for exercise, the outlet for artistic communication, the outlets for community activity and community organizing and collective responses have been removed. So maybe more than Al, I worry a great deal about someone who has never had the chance to work with someone like Al or like yourself, Toby, in terms of learning, different ways of self-regulating extremes of emotion and behavior and what happens in those circumstances. So I actually think there may be maybe good uses of certain tools to try and keep people safe. But again, we go back to informed consent. I worry about the removal and the obstacles to people having the healthy outlets for what would normally be, ways to actually improve, their anxiety levels. So back to that question, from Chile, I think each individual has to determine how much anxiety they can live with. But like Al's saying, yeah, how could you not be anxious, at this moment in time? The question is, what is the anxiety getting in the way of? What is it preventing, or what problems is it
Sure.
causing? And
Okay.
who's defining those problems?
So here's my kind of wrap up questions to you both then. Given the fact, and I'm looking at the other comments as well, that we got people working 40 hours a week. We got people working longer. We got people now laid off, furloughed. We have a whole host, 1,000,001 reasons why we should be crying at least once a week and tapping into that part of our humanity. Because again, when we suffer an injury to our humanity, the only thing that's going to really restore our humanity is humanity. Love, empathy, compassion, play, laughter, artistic expression through clay and music and art and all of this kind of community and spirituality. Whether you're Muslim or Christian or Hindi, doesn't matter, but at this point it's tapping into that humanity. So for the audience, for the people who are listening, and again, to keep our optimism, to keep our positivity, to not dive into those dark places, what are 5 things that you would recommend that people can do very quickly? Just shoot off 5 things that you think that are really good for people to kind of build their own immune system, if you will, both emotionally. Maybe we don't have to go into the biology, because I think people get that already, that they should be outside in the sun, that they should be getting vitamin C and vitamin D and eating, healthy fruits and vegetables, organic as much as possible. But emotionally, mentally, what are your thoughts? 5 things. Dr. Galves.
Well, I would say exercise, and you can do great exercise with social distancing.
Okay,
in fact, exercise is about social distancing.
Yep.
Meditation, meditation, I think, is a great idea. Mindfulness meditation, connecting with other people, being social as you can be, sharing your experience, connecting with other people.
When we do have this virtual community, which again is a great way of connecting and whatnot.
Absolutely. Zoom. I would say trying to get the facts as well as you can, trying to really understand what the threat is, what it isn't, etc. Getting the facts.
All right, so maybe educating oneself, and I'll put on to that also, and I'm going to add my own little one right in here, is that taking a break from social media, taking a break from the news media. I mean, I watch a great deal of it. I try to stay informed, but I recognize that it can be overwhelming for me. And again, I got a healthy ego. I'm a strong individual mind, but I've got to turn it off some days. I got to go sometimes a few days, because I'm like, you know what? It's too confusing. There's too much doom and gloom. People are trying to pull me this way or this way into some ideology. And sometimes you got to check out. So
that's my 5th.
All right. That was your 5th.
And one more. That's my 5th. And along with that, I'll say read. Spend some time reading.
Yeah, good. All right, Dr. Jackson, I'll put it back to you. Same question. What are 5 pragmatic things that you think, or for your own life? I mean, again, you're obviously working hard. You're down there. You see all this stuff happening. How do you, for your own life, how do you keep yourself in a good place while going through this?
Well, one thing is to see, I guess, re-examining one's life in terms of existential priorities. This is a time for serious reflection, without being overly negative. But, a lot of folks probably don't have a time out, whether it's something they choose. This one's forced, in terms of looking at what in the world has my life been about, and what is my life about going forward. So I agree with everything that you and Al have already identified. When we talk about existential priorities, we really speak about the need to identify what is it that gives my life the most meaning, or why am I here? And so this is a transpersonal, existential yalom kind of thing, which is, what is it that people really want out of their lives? And for some people, we can't dictate what gives them meaning. But we have to understand, as cultures and societies and the world, that the world's not going to be the same potentially for years to come. And the sense of what allows people to survive and endure. I guess one of the questions is there a difference between surviving and living? And for some people right now, surviving is difficult enough. That's certainly the plight of probably most people on Earth. And now the industrialized North has been sucked into this same existential problem of, hey, this is kind of tough. But there is a difference between surviving and living. And so that would be the first thing to contemplate. What's the difference between surviving and living? And I think you've already identified some things that strike both check boxes. You know, the easy things are exercising in whatever way people can do it. Certainly outdoors is best. Exactly. There you go. That's very good. So exercise, because it's that's on our list for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Diet, nutrition, you know, what people choose to eat right now has a huge impact on how well. Okay, a banana and you're exercising. So you get 2 points for that. Okay, you get both.
I have 3. My
That's it.
protein shake is right here.
Oh my God. And then we talked about you know, creativity, and
Yeah.
you talked about art and music, and you know, this idea, again, it goes back to what are we going to create? I find, quite honestly, I find myself having a hard time when people shoot jokes and they shoot humorous things and say, just laugh and be happy.
Yeah.
I don't think this is a tremendous time to just laugh and be happy. I think this is a time to be realistic about how can I be of help to some other person today?
Sure. Sure.
Can I help?
And I agree with you. I think that there's a seriousness that we need to have with balanced with that idea of because humor is obviously a coping mechanism. We all cope different ways. Amazon sales have skyrocketed. You know, Home Depot, Menards are skyrocketing right now with their sales. So there's obviously people who are profiting from this, but that's part of the coping mechanisms.
Yeah, but I want to
Drink it more.
put in a plug for nature, you know, and the time to really be in touch with.
Wait a minute, is nature still open or has that been shut down? I'm not sure. You know,
I'm looking out the window and the sun is still turned on. Hasn't been meted out yet. I'm sure that our government would charge for it if they can. That's probably the next thing they're working on, is to privatize sunlight and air. That'll be the next thing.
They've already done the water, so.
That's it. But I think we have a similar list, you know, in terms of what can people do. I think the social piece, like Al talks to, is social connectedness is, you know, electronic connections is what we have to tolerate, but it's not the same, you know, as being with people face to face. And I think that's something that's really difficult. I think one of the things that's difficult right now, from my perspective, is the response of people to this issue has become so politicized, you know, in the United States. And people seem to be in 2 different camps. In my community, there seems to be a large number of folks who are just in denial, or they truly believe that the thing's over and there's no reason to worry. And so that the issue of how do we behave as responsible citizens of our community and the world is something that's very important. So,
and that's going to be a whole nother discussion on another day, because obviously there's a lot of very strong, powerful opinions for both sides of that discussion, I guess, and we should do that again. Guys, I want to thank you so much for, you know, I know Dr. Jackson, you know, out of the blue, I just sent it to you a few minutes ago, and I said, you didn't even know you're coming into this discussion, you know. But
no, it's wonderful. I'm so underemployed right now. It's fantastic. So,
but you know, and I'm coming down by you guys in your area. This is I'll give you a sneak peek for the Facebook world. You know, I've been doing these little, you know, chats with the video podcasting, just because, again, we were supposed to, i.e. I was supposed to be out in Hollywood shooting a television show, which I agreed to do. And so we've signed contracts and we're supposed to be in production. And so this Dr. Toby Out On Call is an actual TV show. But I thought, well, what the heck, I might as well do something in the interim and maybe have some fun interviewing people and getting my feet wet with this. So I'm actually coming down because guess what? Arizona is open for business for at least video production. So I am taking, you know, precautions. I'm going to be wearing my little suit and my mask and everything I can do to get down there. But I'm going to be down there next week, actually shooting the first couple of days of the TV show. And I can't share yet what platform it's going to be on, but we do and have met with some networks who have extreme interest in it. And we are really confident that it is getting picked up. And so, yeah, it's really exciting. So I'll be down there next week to be shooting the first television show of Dr. Toby Out On Call. And you're all first to know about it right now.
Wow.
Yay.
Congratulations.
Yeah, it'll be fun. Good. So, all right, guys, thank you so much for joining. And I will be in touch with both you, Dr. Jackson and Dr. Galves.
Great. Thanks for having us.
Toby. Nice seeing you, Grace.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye-bye now.
Going.
Well, there you have it, guys. Dr. Grace Jackson, and again, I would call her a world-renowned psychiatrist. She's written a book called Broken Brains. You know, oh no, not Broken Brains. I'm sorry. There's Drug-Induced Dementia that she wrote, which was an amazing book, The Perfect Crime. And then was it another one, Broken Brains? Well, you had to look her up. You know, she's just a wonderful lady, and I've heard lots of her lectures. She's a really neat psychiatrist, and Dr. Galves. So be well to each other. Again, this is a work in progress. I'm a work in progress. You're a work in progress. You don't have to be perfect. We just have to keep trying. You do the best you can. You try to do a little better than what your parents did for you and your family and your kids and your community, and being safe, and trying to make that. And remember too, when you start to feel down and out, or things, you know, start to go bad, don't always personalize it. It's not always about you. You're not the center of the world, even though it's, you know, our inner child, we always think we're the center of the world. And, you know, I think it's because of us. Somebody gets mad at you, or your boss goes off on you, or for whatever reason you don't get, you know, your check from the government, or something happens. Remember, it's not about you. Sometimes things happen because of other things, not about you. Tell yourself that 20 times a day, you'll probably start to feel better. Make sure you get outside in the sun. Make sure you're going for walks. Make sure you're exercising, eating healthy the best you can. Do those self-affirmation statements every morning. You wake up, you tell yourself, you know what, it's going to be a great day. It's a new day. You know, nobody's actively trying to kill you. Nobody's trying to blow you up right now. You know, sometimes that reframe, that cognitive reframing, you know, by comparative analysis is what we call it. You compare something worse than what you have, and you start to feel a little better because of it. Being able to do that. When you start to have that negative thought, you know, if it's as gimmicky as putting a little rubber band on your wrist and snapping it and saying, all right, I'm going to give myself a little punishment for when I have a negative thought, or giving yourself a reward when you start to feel or do something good. You get on that treadmill, you go for the walk, you call your father, your mother, you reach out to somebody. You know, if it doesn't feel good intrinsically, give yourself, you know, something as a reinforcer for doing something good for you. Get a good sleep schedule. Again, going to bed at the same time, same place, not watching, you know, good sleep hygiene, we call it, where you're not watching TV right before, or you're, you know, reserve your bed for laying down and sleeping, and that other thing that we do in bed. But again, you don't want to be just reading and doing stuff like that, because sometimes your circadian rhythms can get a little messed up, because your brain's not sure. It's like, oh, is it sleepy time? Or is it read book time? Or is it, you know, I'm just going to lay here and go on my computer and play game time? If you reserve that, you know, and you condition yourself, it gets a lot easier to do those types of things. So those are a few tips, you know, from Dr. Toby. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you guys had fun. ISEPP is a wonderful community. It's global. Make sure that you guys are tracking it. I'm not sure. We do have a conference that's going to be coming up towards the end of the year. I have not had any discussions with them. I'm assuming it's still on for now until you hear otherwise. And we sure hope that you guys can all make it to the conference. It is out in Los Angeles this year. And I think it's towards the end of October into November. Make sure you go to the website, which is www.psychintegrity, that's P-S-Y-C-H, integrity.org. And this is a international group of professionals, psychiatrists, teachers, professors, researchers, psychologists, social workers, attorneys, and laypersons as well. And their sole purpose is to inform the public about mental health and how mental health and policy and intervention and research all come together in a very ethical manner. It is a critical analysis of what we've been talking about, and it is very evidence-based. I've shared a lot of information. Some of you may think I'm totally whacked. That's okay. I encourage you, you know, send me a note. I'd love to have you on and have a discussion about that. Anything that I say here, I always back up with research. And if I say something and you want that research or those citations, send me a note. Be happy to share it with you at any time. Okay, be well to each other, guys. And thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you had fun as well as I did. So take care. Be good to each other.